Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing one of our longtime listeners, Taylor Aller. I'm so excited to have you here, Taylor. And Taylor is going to be diving into her identity as a multi-potentialite. Did I say that right?
Yes, yes, you did.
Okay. Multi-potentialite, which I know is probably a term I'm with you guys too. I'm like, what does that mean? So we're going to talk about that today and how that fed into getting debt free and paying off her personal debt by leveraging her business. But zooming out a little bit, Taylor, has her hands in a lot of things, but she's a registered massage therapist as well as an educator and consultant. So anyways, Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Ellen. I love everything you're doing. It's so fun to be on the side of the screen. Thank you.
I know. You'll get to experience the podcast from a whole different lens. So, as I referenced, Taylor's case study today is about how Taylor and her partner paid off nearly $70,000 in consumer debt. So, that's including the interest. So, it was about $65,000 in loans. And then, the interest included brought it up to almost $70,000 using this concept of multi-potentialism. So before we get into defining that term, first, because you listen in, Taylor, I want to know your Cubicle to CEO story. What was the catalyst that led you into entrepreneurship?
I don't think I've ever had a cubicle. So that's, I like out of the womb.
Lucky you.
No, my dad was an entrepreneur and my mom was absolutely not. And I remember when I first learned what my parents did for work, I don't know if you ever had that moment where you realized your parents left the house, they went to work, and then you were wondering, what do they do when they go to work? I remember having that moment and asking my parents, and what my mom described sounded like a nightmare. And then what my dad described sounded amazing. And my mom has worked for the government. She's retired now, but she worked for 42 years in the same industry. And I was like, bleh, I don't think I could ever do that. Like I had a visceral reaction to that. And then my dad had his own company and he was doing different things every day. And he was so multifaceted in the tasks he was doing. And I was like, I want to do that. And that's kind of how I started. Of course, I had jobs and I had things that I did for a living. But if you watch my TED Talk, you'll hear that my resume belongs to like 14 different people. And I started in like an independent contractor journey really young as like a semi-professional hip hop dancer and choreographer and dance teacher. So I started doing entrepreneurship that way through creative pursuits. And then that led to a whole bunch of other areas. And through a long weaving story, it led me to where I am now. But I've been what I like to call a multi-potentialite and that entrepreneur now for over a decade.
That's incredible. I love that you got to experience two very different approaches from your parents to work and what it means to build a career. Like with your mom really being on the extreme end of staying in one place for 4 decades and especially working in government. We have a couple friends who work in government or work for the state. And I can only imagine, I feel like of all the different organizations you could work for, that's probably the most heavy-handed in terms of bureaucracy. And so I can see how someone like you who's so creative and thrives in change would find it very, very difficult to thrive in an environment like that. So super interesting. My dad is also an entrepreneur, but he didn't enter entrepreneurship till later in my life. So I didn't grow up with that perspective. It wasn't until my later high school years that he started his business. But certainly I think there was an impact there in terms of, just being able to think outside of the box and dream really big. So I love the influences that both of our dads had on us.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thank you, Dad. I know he actually listens to this podcast on all of his long walks, so it's really sweet. It's hi, Dad, if you're listening.
That's so special.
Yeah, very special. So you mentioned again, this term multi-potentialism. Is this a term you made up? I have to ask, like, is this a real word? What does it mean? Or tell us what it means to you.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for it, but no. It is a term coined by Emily Wapnick, and she also has her own TED Talk, which is fantastic. So it essentially means somebody who is passionate about more than one thing, which is the majority of people. And we feel like we are alone in that because the world is designed for people who are experts, for people who have one singular passion. And they stick to that for X amount of years. They achieve that standard of success. And then they're the people that we celebrate. They're like the golden star. They're who we're aiming for. And that leaves most of people who are passionate about more than one thing behind. So I loved that term. It changed my life when I found it. And I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't.
So I've got to ask then, In your mind, what is the difference between multi-potentialism and being multi-passionate? Or do you find that they are just synonyms, sister terms, if you will?
Yeah, definitely sister terms. I like to use multi-potentialite as more of a noun and multi-passionate as like an adjective, but they mean generally the same thing to me.
Interesting distinction there. No, totally. I get that. And I'm excited to dig into all the different ways you really manifested that in your business to pay off this $70,000 of debt, which is a huge chunk of change. So let's give our listeners some context here first. To my understanding, the majority of this debt, if not all of this debt, was personal, but it was kind of a mixture of different things. Do you want to kind of give us a background on how you started or ended in this, situation before you decided to start your debt-free journey?
Yeah. So my husband, Jake, he's fantastic. He's my baby daddy. He is my best friend. He's wonderful. We got to a point just after we got married and before we had kids. And as a woman, I'm sure you can relate to this. I felt very ambitious about work. And this was like many, many, many years ago. I had an income goal of crossing six figures. Making $100K a year was like, if I can do this on my own, I can do anything. And when I get there, I'm going to be rich. It's going to feel so rich and lovely. And I remember doing our taxes in like April-ish time and seeing, oh my God, I actually did it. I reached this goal. I made $100K. Amazing. And then like this tidal wave of terrible feeling washed over me. And I was like, but I don't feel rich. And I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to hit 100K and like confetti was going to pop out of somewhere, maybe the closet or whatever. And I was just going to feel rich and everything was going to be easy. And I looked around and I was like, that's not happening. So then I pulled up my bank accounts and I started to like dig through a whole bunch of stuff. And I was like, okay, I definitely see some red flags here, but this can't be everything. And then I remember texting my husband being like, we need to talk. And he's like, are we getting divorced? I was like, no, we're not. Well, we're going to be together, but we need to talk about money and like, let's see where this goes. And that like next couple of weeks, everything shifted and we started pulling all the skeletons out of the closet. We turned all the lights on everywhere. We started collecting all of the balances from all of the things. We started doing like an inventory of our checking accounts and our savings accounts and our credit cards. And we came to the conclusion in like a week or two time, because it took some time, that we were like $65,000 in debt, not including our mortgage, but like consumer debt. And it was a mixture of things. Like you said, it was a couple different credit cards. We had student loans in there. We owed my mom like 10 grand. Blech, I didn't like that feeling. Like it was so many different things all compiled together. And I was like, okay, well, here's the elephant sitting on our chest. And like, what are we going to do about this? And my husband had so many issues around money, our biggest fight ever in our like, we met each other when I was 17, and I'm not going to tell you my age, but we've been together a very long time. We've got
Well, you
two
look
babies.
very young, so I mean,
Yes.
it's a
And
mystery.
we have a lot of history, Ellen, so much. And the biggest fight in our life so far was him not opening his bank app. I was like, open the bleeping app. Like, what is wrong here? And so there was so much context around money for the two of us, for like identity. So like in addition to this staggering bill that we realized, and now that's sitting on our chest in high definition, we also had like all of this other mindset stuff. You know, I had my own about what I thought making 100K a year would look like. He had his own about being a man and a provider, and like all of these different things intermingled. And it was like this slap in the face of reality that we had to get our stuff together. And like, now is the time. We got to do this. So yeah, it was quite a rude awakening. But yeah, we started to dig in. We looked at different resources. We started leveraging business like we're going to get to, I'm sure. And I'm happy to get into all the numbers. So ask me all the numbers questions. Yeah. And then we knocked it out. We thought initially it would take 26 months and we did it in 9.5.
9.5?
9.5 months. We knocked it out. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. It is truly impressive what focused efforts and focused action can get you. And I have a similar, not exactly the same. I mean, my debt amount was much smaller. It was about 20,000. But I remember for me, it was student loans. I, got on this personal finance journey when I was nearing the end of college, and I just became obsessed with this idea of graduating debt free. And I was like, okay, what can I do to pay off this, almost 20,000 in student loans before graduation? And when I set that goal, cause it was like August entering into my senior year, I was like, that's such a lofty goal. Like, it's okay if I don't hit it, but let's just make that the goal and then see what happens. And then lo and behold, I think paid it off in March. If I remember correctly, I think it was March. And so it was actually in like 10 months time, and it happened even earlier. So on the one hand, it's like shocking that you could, have the amount of, even less for you, 9 months compared to 26 months, that you could make such drastic progress in such a short amount of time. But at the same time, having kind of experienced that on a small scale, I'm also not surprised, just because, that dedicated focus and really, really getting clear on what you're wanting to do, especially if you have a partner to do it with you, I think is just such a game changer. And what I found most interesting, I think, Taylor, as I was listening to you talk, is how there could be such a big, I don't know if burden is the right word, but like there could be such a big, like you were describing, like an elephant in the room. But until you took the time to do those deep dives into your accounts and like all of your balance sheets, you didn't even, like, at least from what I'm understanding, you weren't even consciously aware that you had that much consumer debt staring you in the face, right? It's kind of like easy to like hide it into those little corners when you're not thinking about it every day.
So easy.
So like that's what's most fascinating about,
Mhm.
hearing your story. And at this moment in time when you discovered, okay, like we have $65,000 in debt, we want to pay this off in 26 months. When you were actively running at your business at that time, did you feel the impacts of this consumer debt weighing on your business, or did you feel like your business was kind of fully separated from what was happening in your personal finance life?
Yeah, it was on the way to being separated, and it was the catalyst that pushed it deep into separation. So in our household, the way that my husband and I had done our finances is that we had some joint stuff, but most of it was separate. And then for me, with my own finances, I had like personal household stuff, and it was generally separate from business stuff. But I still had some things kind of intermingling in throughout the gaps, right? So I had, a business bank account, and I had, those types of things where it was most of the time separated, but there were lots of things that overlapped. It was like, oh, I forgot the card, I'll just put it on my personal and kind of flip back and forth. And when you're not incorporated, that's easy to get really gray. And this was actually the catalyst. So, right, we got out of debt July 2019, August 2019, I became incorporated because I was like, we're keeping this very separated. This is going to be very separate because we need that to be there. And through that journey, which I'm sure we'll get to, I worked with accountants. We found ways to leverage taxes. Like there were so many things that I learned that it was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? So yeah, they were a little bit intermingled, but it was definitely the catalyst to keep them apart. And I ran my business finances, what I thought was like quite mean and quite strategic. And then when it came to personal, I did not. And just like you said, like it's so easy to live with a running credit card balance, or it's so easy to think of student loans as something that's going to be forever and we can accept it. And also kudos to you, paying off 20 grand of student loans before you even graduated. Holy stinking cow. That's amazing, Ellen. Well done. But it's just so easy to think that those are things that we're going to have forever and like we should just accept those into our lifestyles. And that's not the case. And a big reason why I noticed I didn't feel rich yet is I had crossed 100K and I knew I was heading there, and I like gifted my mom a trip to Vegas, and I was treating my friends to dinner, and I was like living this rich life, and I'm a very generous person. So I was like living it outwardly. And then I was like, hang on, like, why am I still struggling to like buy the groceries? Why am I still not able to take that trip to Mexico? And like, why are these things not happening the way I thought they were? And it's those sneaky things that both things are sneaky. Your dreams just sneakily get farther and farther away. And like all of these nightmares get louder, louder, and louder, until you look at them. And it's so important to do it, even though it's not sexy and it's not exciting and it kind of sucks, but it's worth it.
Yeah, no, it is no easy task. And I think the reason I was attracted to this case study that you had pitched, and I was like, yes, we need to have you on our show, is to your point, most of our listeners, not all, but most of our listeners, and similar to myself and to yourself, we are bootstrap business owners, right? We did not take on funding or investors to build our businesses. And so I think for so many of us, our personal lives and our business finances are very intertwined and commingled, even if our actual transactions and our business bank accounts and, the incorporations, like everything is separate legally and on paper, but as a business owner, like we've all been there, or we've heard friends who, hey, if you're struggling to make payroll a month, you might sacrifice your own personal pay to make that happen. And in that way, that's what I mean by, your business and your personal finances being very intertwined. And so I'm glad that we're bringing this story to the forefront, because I'm sure you are not alone. In fact, I know it that you are not alone in trying to, build your own bootstrap business, and then also having to, like you said, stare down your own personal finances and figuring out how you can put yourself on a solid foundation there. So I want to get into the 4 things that you did that you feel made the biggest difference in paying off this debt. And I wanted to start with the business revamp. So you explained this as strategically raising your prices and restructuring your service packages, which resulted in a significant income boost. If you remember, Taylor, what percentage of your total debt payoff would you attribute to this one piece alone?
Let's start with the percentage part. So, because of course I was paying off debt with my partner. So let's consider that context, right? Although to be fair, I took on probably the lion's share of that repayment. And then out of that percentage, I would say at least 60% was a result of me restructuring my business and paying myself more strategically, because there's only so much you can cut in terms of expenses, but there's no limit on what you can earn. So restructuring prices and packages, giving myself a raise, asking for a raise from other, income sources as well, that probably accounted for a significant boost in what we were doing. So if the total was about 70K, I would say like at least 30K to 45K was because we were smarter about what we were earning and earning more.
That's awesome.
Let me back up. There's different things that I do. And especially at that period of time, there was different things I do in my business as a multi-potentialite to bring in income. Some of it is service-based. Some of it is product-based. Some of it is education-based. And some of it is like freelancing side fun projects. So we'll just call that freelancing. But it's like the side fun things like speaking gigs or teaching at different places or doing creative work and graphic design, like fun things that I'm skilled at that I can also monetize if I want to. So when it came to my practice, the first thing I did was give myself a raise. I was like, you know what, we need to do this and we need to pay this off like right now. And I have like a 3-month waiting list. I'm like, why am I waiting to raise my prices? Like we should be doing that, and we should be doing that consistently. So from that point on, like every single year, raising is just built into the structure of what I do in my practice as a massage therapist.
Can I pause you for a second there?
Yeah.
Just before this question leaves my brain, because I definitely wanted to ask you this. That initial jump in price increase, what was that raise that you did on your services? And then now you said it's an annual thing that you've built into your business model. What does that percentage increase yearly look like now?
It varies. Right now, it's a little bit more consistent. So at the beginning, I had ground to make up. So I went to like a 15 to 20% increase in my prices because I was like severely underpaying myself. And it sneaks up on you until you realize and have a reason to look at that. And so initially it was like a 15 to 20%. And then now it's probably like I would say like a 5%, if my math is right, like a 5 to 7% every single year. Like sometimes maybe 3%. Through COVID, I paused it a little bit, as we all did. The world was going crazy. But now that things are pressing play again, I think the last increase was probably 5%, maybe 6%. So yeah, kind of like on par with inflation.
I was just going to say it kind of keeps up with inflation and then adds a little bit of margin. This is something that my friend Caitlin Carlson, who, if you have listened to the podcast for a long time, then those of you, who have, are probably familiar with her name. She's the founder of Theory Planning Partners, and she's my personal finance, or I guess she's more than just a financial advisor, but that's probably the term that most would know her by. And one of the things that really impressed me actually as a client of hers, and it's kind of, mirroring what you're saying here, Taylor, is when we signed a contract, we being my husband and I, when we signed a contract to work with her as a client, I mean, as a financial advisor, as a wealth manager, right? Like she's going to be with her clients for decades, basically into and past retirement. And so she had built into her contract a yearly, I can't remember the exact percentage, it was probably around 3% raise on the pricing of her services to account for inflation. And it's so obvious, like when I hear you talk about it or when she did it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense because your dollar loses value year over year. But for whatever reason, no one had ever really told me that. Like when I was a service provider, I never thought, oh, I need to build this into the contract, right? You kind of almost feel like if a client signs with you at a certain rate, you kind of are obligated to keep that rate forever until they leave you. And that's just simply not the case. But for whatever reason, I just think that it's not as common of a proactive business practice as you've, obviously done very well to do so. And so I just wanted to really call that out for our listeners because I think it's something that more of us should consider. But anyways, thank you for sharing that piece. I don't know if you remember your train of thought before I I had interrupted you to ask this, but if you do, please finish your thought there.
I know we were sharing about the different income sources. So that was one with my practice. We had an increase there. I had started consulting around that year as well. So when I was consulting, I had based it off of my practice as a massage therapist. So I work out of a clinic and I treat a lot of like medical issues, perinatal issues, injury rehab, but we do a lot of treatment plans, but they are paying on a treatment per treatment basis. And I had started my consulting with that same framework. I was like, okay, well, they'll pay for every single call and like that will just be that. And then when we were going through that, I was like, this isn't working. And I started in that time diving deep into a community of other women entrepreneurs, which I highly recommend to anybody. And if you're listening to this, you already know that like women are your people and like we have to support each other. And I was so lucky and blessed and grateful that I ended up stumbling across Business Babes community, which you know and love as well. And they just changed everything. And I started to like invest in programs and learn about how to like actually structure a business, and that shifted everything when it came to my consulting. So the massage therapy side, I had been doing that for years and years at that point, and I felt pretty stable with what I was doing there, although I needed that raise like we talked about. But then when it came to consulting, it shifted everything. I started to like package things and have longer term contracts, and I started to have like bundling and installments and all of these things, which resulted in another pay raise. So that was really helpful too, to not take one template and apply it to another. It didn't fit and it was working, but it wasn't working well. And then the other areas of my life. So I also teach at a college. I'm an educator. And I went to the college and was like, hey, I'm ready to be a primary instructor. Give me a raise and a better position. So, and obviously like they need primary instructors. And they were like, yes. And I like pitched myself for their business class. And I was like, this is really appropriate. And I'm nailing my massage therapy business. I can totally help other students do the same. And yeah, so it was really helpful to have that kind of all coincide at the same time. So all across the board that was happening. And then the last magic piece, the fireworks of the freelancing. So being a multi-potentialite and having all these skills, I can monetize them at any point. So I started doing graphic design work. I started doing paid speaking gigs. I started doing workshop facilitation. I was doing all of these things that are in my wheelhouse that I really do enjoy, that I don't want to make a business of, but that I can definitely monetize. And so that was a really big boost. We had experimented with online courses and online products, and we got a little bit of revenue from that. Like I shared with you the numbers. We had a like a 2K swing on that, which I mean, in a short period of time, that's like a nice thing to have, but it didn't bring us the same lucrative return that monetizing our skills did in that short-term focused sprint. That was definitely a better choice for us in the short term. In the long term, the value of digital products and courses are there. But in the short term, it didn't give us as much as we thought. And the freelancing was like the magic and the fireworks. And that brought in a significant amount. And my husband did the same. So he's also an audio engineer. He is absolutely incredibly talented. And he does all sorts of stuff with music, with podcasts, with voiceovers and recordings and all kinds of stuff. And he like went nuts and was like working at a studio and taking freelancing gigs on the side. So that was really helpful for him as well.
So cool. So just to give a little context on your husband, his freelancing work, like you just mentioned, was centered around his audio engineering skill. What is his day job or his day business? What does he normally do?
He worked in tech at the time. In Canada, we have a few large telecommunication companies. So he worked with one of them in like the retail and sales side. So he was like, I know, not at all related. Yeah. Yeah, he was working in tech.
That further illustrates your point though of the, the potential of multi-potentialism is that you can monetize these skills that aren't necessarily related to your everyday job or your everyday business, in our case as entrepreneurs. I would love to know for this bucket, this freelancing bucket. So like you mentioned, when you say services, you're really thinking about your massage therapy services. When you're talking about freelancing, you've mentioned skills like graphic design. Do you only pull out the freelancing, I guess, skill set, or like make yourself available for these types of freelancing gigs when you are on a focused financial goal sprint like you were when you were paying off this, $65,000 in debt? Or do you kind of have it always available? Like you're kind of always able to be hired for these services or these skills?
Yeah. So this is like, you're asking for me to open Pandora's box, Ellen.
Let's
So
do it.
a like very high level answer to that. And I'm so happy to get more into details if you want to. But as somebody with multiple passions, that's the fastest way to burn out is if you keep yourself constantly available for all of the passions that you have. That's a very quick way to run yourself into the ground. And I'm speaking from face planting multiple times that way. So it's from experience. So in a way, yes, I am available for those things, but in a way, no, I am not. I have strong boundaries around all of the different income streams I have coming in, the different services that I provide. And I look at things in a 4-year calendar very loosely, and I look really strongly at a 1-year calendar. So I zoom things out really, really far so that I know that I'm headed in the general direction I want to go. And that's loose. I'm not getting married to that plan, but I'm going steady with it, right? And then when my 1-year plan comes up, leading me towards that 4-year, then I get really strategic with that. So I know for my practice as a massage therapist here in Canada, a lot of extended health benefits cover what I do. So we get really busy at the end of the year. So I know the end of the year, like September onward, I call it like the burr months. In the burr months, I'm going to be very busy with my practice. So I don't really schedule anything else. Through the summer, it's a little bit slower. I take on more consulting clients. I do traveling speaking gigs at that time. In the beginning of the year, I'm often planting leads for those consulting clients. And so I start to like reverse engineer and it goes towards that 4-year plan. So that's like a higher level of it where, yes, I'm available for those things, but no, I'm not available for those things all the time. Yeah, I'm very strategic about it. Otherwise, I'll burn out and I won't have time for other things that light me up. And most importantly, my family and my kids. So yeah, I can't do it that way.
Very, very wise. And you kind of actually, I guess, already started to answer the next question that came to mind, which is this idea of, the draw, of course, of being multi-passionate or being a multi-potentialite is that you do have all of these different options available to you to earn income. But some would argue that having so many income streams is actually a distraction versus just doubling or tripling down on one particular skill set or one particular offer or service package, whatever it may be that you are best at, and iterating, scaling. So I wanted you to insert your hot take here. When you're kind of faced with that, I don't even know if dilemma is the right word because I know you're very passionate about being multi-passionate, but I guess just with that question, have you ever wondered, would it be in your favor to, to just, let's say, scale your massage practice if there's like a particular service that you're really, really good at or known for versus trying to, juggle all of these different income streams?
You're like the voice in my head over the past decade. Yes. So as multi-passionate people, we hear that voice loud and clear. We're constantly told like, why don't you just pick something? Are you sure you're doing something new again? Like it's that whole thing. So when you said, and I love the way that you worded it, you said, have you ever thought about doubling down on something so that it would scale more in your favor or lead you to something more in your favor? And the favor is what I want to take out and dissect because it took me a while to come to this realization, which is why I want to zero in on that. To me, favor, I'm going to switch that word for success, right? If I doubled down, I'd be more successful. And it really depends on your definition of success. So if your definition of success is like an $8 billion business, having a large team, working multinationally, then absolutely yes. You should be niching down and you should be iterating and you should have the best stinking thing on the market so that you can be competitive at that level. If your definition of success is getting to play in different areas, supporting your family well, and having a balanced schedule, I work only about 35 hours a week most weeks, and being able to have the relative income that supports my family, to me, that is success. And it took me a really long time to narrow that in. I had kind of burn towards monetary success being success. And I realized a part of that was my definition of success. I want to be comfortable. I like owning my own home. I like having investments. I like having disposable income. I like taking time off work for when I have babies. My husband and I both stay home for a year at a time each time we have a baby. And like, that's wonderful to be able to do that. Money is a part of my success, but balance is the other really big part of my success. And I can't have both at the same time. It's one or the other. I'm a big fan of you can have anything you want. You just can't have it all at once or all by yourself. So I want to pull out that favorite word, change it for success, and then really factor in what that is. So for me, being multi-passionate does lead towards my dream of success. I get to have the kids I want, the husband I want. I get to live in the place I want. I get to do the things I want. And I'm sacrificing an $8 billion business for 6 figures. And to me, that is delicious and acceptable. But if you're hearing my version of success and it sounds like a nightmare, like how I looked at my mom's job in the government and went, ugh, then like, no, you should not be niching down. You should not be figuring out how to keep all these puzzle pieces together. That should not be your challenge. Your challenge should be getting more and more and more specific. I like to talk about it like experts have a depth of knowledge. You should be drilling down into that depth if that's what's going to lead you to your success. And if you want something that has multiple passions, that is well-rounded, that has all of these different puzzle pieces incorporated, you're looking for breadth, not depth. So it's about actually strategically spreading yourself over that time.
What a beautiful perspective. So much sage wisdom, I think, that you shared in those last few minutes, Taylor. Like, I feel very inspired by what you've said. And I think painting that picture of this idea of you can have anything, but maybe not all at once. I think you illustrate that very well in the boundaries that you were referencing earlier around, like, you know, you said during your burr months from September through the end of the year, how you only do massage services during that time because you know that that's going to be your busiest season. But then you know, just the way that you plan and think about your year, I think it's so smart in that, you know, okay, in the summer I can take on more consulting, or, you know, at this time of year I can do this type of thing. And especially hearing, I think for our listeners, they might be going, oh my gosh, Taylor has her hands in so many things. But then to hear you only work 35 hours a week, juggling all of these different things, it goes, okay, it's more manageable than maybe people perceive, because you do have those very clear lines drawn in the sand of, you don't do every single type of thing in one day, right? It's just certain times you do certain things and other times you do other things. And so I love that. I think that's really inspiring. And I think honestly that in many ways, that's the future of work, just in the nature of, you know, more and more people are now independents in terms of freelance work, 1099s, the gig economy. I think people like the idea of having more flexibility and creativity over the type of work that they do and not having it always be the same day after day.
Yeah. And I want to circle back on that too. And I'm so happy to hear you say that I inspired you. Oh, check that off my bucket list. Anyways, but I want to circle back because it wasn't quite as pretty as that. Because there was a moment where I realized, wow, if I want to be mid 6 figures, high 6 figures, cross into 7 figures, if that's even something I want to consider, I have to now sacrifice all of these other things. And there was a stark realization around fertility between my husband and I, where I was like, wow, I need to not, because my body's telling me not to. And I want children more than I want that number in my bank account. And that was a big reason why we paid off all our debt, so that our running expenses personally are super low and super lean. So we can afford not to make high 6 figures and still have this delicious version of success for our family. We still have retirement squared away. You know, we're planning for 55, we get to kick it out of there, right? And it's like all of these things are achievable, but it does take that realization of what will you exchange for that? And really getting honest. And it was really hard for me to let go of that. Like there's a greedy part of me that's like, if I can make more, I want to make more, you know? And as a woman, I'm like, I should make more. I deserve to make more, you know? And so it was, quite a wrestling match in my mind around that for me to come to peace with where I want my life to truly be. And because I have the potential to do that, doesn't mean that I have to. And if anybody else is wrestling with I'm working a lot, there's potential to make more, don't leave money on the table, keep reaching, raise the glass ceiling, it came to a point where I had to ask, was that right for me? And the answer was no. It was like, this mid-range is what's right for me. Mid-range here and mid-range here means I get to have all the things I want. So yeah, it wasn't quite as pretty as that. There's sacrifices and there's money I leave on the table, but I do that strategically and because I want
Intentionally,
to.
right.
Yes, intentionally. Perfect word.
I appreciate your honesty there. And I think this concept of enough rather than more is something that not unique to women, but just as ambitious people we grapple with, right? People who always want to achieve their full potential, and that potential expands as you evolve and grow. And so it's hard to keep up sometimes with your own potential and your own ambition. And so I loved the way that you phrased, and I might be not quoting it perfectly, but how you said, like, we can afford to make less. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that, at least not on our podcast. And so it's really fascinating to hear, oh yeah, in and of itself, it's a luxury to actually be able to afford a lifestyle that you don't have to make as much money to be able to sustain, like you said, all the things that you would define as a full and rich life. And so I just wanted to pull that out for our listeners. I'd love to move to the second piece of your case study on the things that helped you pay off this debt. So the second component that was a big needle mover was capitalizing on tax advantages. And obviously, disclaimer, always, you want to consult with an expert and someone who can help you in this area. But I would love to hear from your unique circumstance. What were some of those tax advantages that played well in, being able to help you pay off your debt?
So I am in Canada. Taxes are a little bit different. So keep that in mind with some of the things that I'm sharing. But high level, a lot of these things can overlap. So I had not well versed myself in what could be a tax write-off and what couldn't. So that was like education number one, determining all of these other things I could actually write off that I wasn't, right? So many other things. So those are things that get overlooked, like meals and accommodations and transportation and gifts that I'd be buying for, colleagues or team members or people that I'd be working with. All of those types of things can actually be write-offs too. Bigger things like education, I thought it had to be like accredited education, and sometimes it's other education that can also be there. Other types of programs and softwares, anything that you're doing digitally. Of course, like your own bills to a certain degree can be written off or incorporated in that. So that was a huge component. The other part too, in my industry, I have to have a lot of insurances, right? I have to have liability insurance and malpractice insurance. I also have disability insurance for myself because my body is my tool in a portion of what I do. So, if I break an arm, I can't really work. Even if I break a thumb, I can't really work, so it's like super minute like that. And those are all things that can also be tax write-offs too, that I was writing off some, but not all. And then when I became incorporated, so this was like that catalyst, there's so much now that runs through my corporation. And those are things like life insurance and my HSA, so a health spending account. Like I run those types of things through the business, and I get to now leverage those tax advantages. And also because, like you said, I can afford to pay myself less. I shelter a lot of my income through the corporation and pay myself the salary that I need for our bills. And then I pay out the rest strategically in dividends or in shareholder loans or, all of these other tax advantaged ways where I don't have to take it as personal income. I can take it as other things. So that's also really fantastic. I can do that at the end of the year or quarterly if I want to. I've done that before. So those are ways that didn't necessarily at the time help me with debt, but those are things I definitely leverage now to stay debt free, because since 2019, we've had zero consumer debt and we will continue on that. So, those are things that we leverage now in terms of that. And it's very important, like you said, we're not professionals, but there are people who are. So pay for their time and show them all of your things and let them look through, because they know specifically for you, whether it's your province and state, whether it's, provincially or federally or whatever that looks like, they know all of those things inside and out. It's their job. And there's so many things that they shed a light on and educated me on that, like, the benefits were insane. And my tax bill, I remember my first tax bill when I graduated school was, and this was like a decade ago, maybe more. And my first tax bill as like a full-time entrepreneur was around like 30K. And that was like my tax bill. I didn't have 30K and I wasn't like prepared for that. And I had like, 15K and I was like, ugh. And I was like, there has to be ways to bring this down. And so I did a little bit of research, but not enough. And then when 2019 hit and we did, the whole overhaul, there was like a whole bunch that we got to shift around. And then the other part to consider is if you do file taxes with a partner, you can also leverage if they have a business or if they don't. There's ways that you can do that. And in Canada, I'm not sure what it looks like in the States, because I know you guys do have tax advantaged investing. accounts that you can use, that was another part of our strategy as well. And especially now that we're incorporated, we do tax advantage investing too. So those are ways that we bring down the tax bill legally above board in ways that are okay and that are just sitting on the table that require me to do no more work. So yeah, that was a big part of it.
And that's the thing too about entrepreneurship. A unique advantage of entrepreneurship and small business ownership is that, and again, I'm speaking more from the perspective of living in the United States, but I'm sure Canada is very similar based on what you just described. The tax code is written to benefit small businesses. There are very specific things that you can leverage that are legal in the tax code that as a small business owner, you have access to that the average employee does not. And so be proactive, as Taylor was suggesting, to work with an expert and professional. And I always say, like, you want to elevate your own financial IQ. The more you understand about how finances work, even if it's not your favorite thing. I personally am more of like a personal finance nerd, so I love learning about this stuff, but I understand not everyone feels the same way. But the more you can open your eyes and try to understand these things, at least on a high level, like know enough to be dangerous, right? Then hire the experts to implement and execute on your behalf so you make sure that you're doing everything by the book. But it is so, so important not to overlook these tax advantages. And there is an episode that we had on our show, and I can't remember off the top of my head what episode number, but we'll make sure to drop it in the show notes. So if you're listening to this right now and you live in the United States and you want to learn about some of the tax advantages that you can take advantage of, then make sure you listen. I think it was like a bonus episode with, again, I referenced Caitlin earlier with Caitlin about the tax advantage retirement savings in specific. So anyways, check out the show notes if you're curious. But Taylor, thank you so much for sharing that perspective from the Canadian side too, because I know that there's a good chunk of our audience who does live in Canada. So I know that they like getting to be represented, and it's not always having from the American, perspective. So the third thing in your process of paying off debt that you did well was diversification. We kind of already touched on this piece. You even mentioned that you had tried, online courses, and for you, it just wasn't as big of a needle mover as, dipping into the freelance bucket. But is there anything else you wanted to add on this diversification piece that we didn't already touch on?
I do. And it's one thing in particular, and I think is what has allowed me to stay debt-free even through a pandemic, and to pay myself even through a pandemic, and to have monetizable skills even through a pandemic when industry shut down. So as a massage therapist, that's like a big chunk of what I do. It's not everything, but I don't have go-go gadget arms. I can't provide treatment from 6 feet away, so there's limitations to what that looks like. And then when our industry started back up again, and the entire time through that, I also fell pregnant at the same time too, yay, with my daughter. And I didn't have to worry about finances at all because I knew that I had marketable skills. And after we paid off debt, we built up emergency fund. Like there's, like you said, your financial IQ, know enough to be dangerous. There's more you can do here. Definitely chat with Caitlin because she's a boss. But yeah, learn those things that bring you that security and that safety, because that's what allowed me to stay debt free, is having different sources of income, so that if one funnel or tap shut off, I had 3 or 4 others that allowed me to still keep going. And so did my husband. So, there was no need for us to panic, because even if 50% of them shut off, 50% were still going. I didn't have all my eggs in one basket. And that's something I really want to pull out, because I think in today's world, especially as things are evolving, and especially with AI and with tech, like we don't really know where things are heading. So if you do have those multiple passions and you are able to monetize them, I think you have a secret superpower, and you should probably lean into it.
Yes, 1000%. And actually, as you were talking, it sparked another question, kind of going back to strategy number 1, the business revamp, when you were restructuring your packages. I know we're circling back to 1, but I had to ask you this because I think it is important to understand. When you were talking about restructuring your packages from, one-off services, like, as a massage therapist, I'm thinking about every time I go get a massage, usually I'm paying by the hour, right? Like it's one cost if you have a 60-minute massage versus a 90-minute versus a 30-minute. So can you give an example of how you got away from that kind of like hourly exchange, time for money, and built like an actual package out of that? Because I think that's going to be really helpful for our listeners that work in a business or in a field more similar to you, where that kind of hourly pricing is more prominent.
For massage therapy, I didn't do that. I kept everything in that hour-to-hour basis. But I do know massage therapists that do that. So they'll have clients or patients that they know come for a year at a time, and they will prepay for an entire year. They will have 10 sessions that they can pay for right off the bat. They can have like a monthly subscription service. I know there's, in Canada especially, there's different clinics that operate only in that avenue. And especially people that come to your home, so they'll buy like X amount of home visits for people that can't leave or attend the clinic. So there's ways that you can package it that way. My restructuring and packaging was more for my consulting. I had taken the hour for hour and I had transitioned that to consulting. And the minute I took that away, my profits soared with that. That was like a big changer, because with consulting, I do have the work that I do on the calls with my clients, but then I also have work that I do off the calls with my clients. And it's really important that a lot of those things, I'm taking people through the same methodology every single time. And when I'm exchanging my time for money and I get better at what I do, I was making less. And I was like, that doesn't work. No, I should be getting a raise for getting better at my job. So, having packages and having bundles of things and purchasing multiples of these things, it made it more efficient for me to be able to have higher profits. And it also ended up making it more accessible for the people that I was working with. So yeah, there are ways to bundle that, whether they're buying like a number of things, month of things. So you can go based on number, you can go based on time, you can go based on deliverables. Those are usually the 3 different ways that I categorize my bundles, is what they're getting. So out of that deliverable aspect, how long they're working with me, so the time, and then how many times they're working with me. I usually separate them out in different aspects of that.
Yeah. And I really just want to echo that last point you made about really honing in on the deliverable, like the outcome of actually getting to work with you. Because to your point, time is almost like the least relevant thing sometimes when it comes to consulting, because it's not about the physical minutes that you spend with the client on a call or face to face, but rather what your knowledge and your experience refined over all of that time is allowing them to do, right? And just to give our listeners a great example of this, the retreat that we're hosting next month that we sold out, it's 1 day of programming in total. I'm not sure how many hours that will be, that we're, face to face and actually teaching or workshopping, but I imagine it's going to be less than 10 hours, right? And people paid $10,000 for that ticket. And it's not about the 1 day of consulting that they're having. It's about what that information applied to their business can actually deliver in terms of results. And those results are worth far more than 10,000. And so I love that you brought that piece up, Taylor, because I think it's so important that people really understand that, especially when it comes to consulting as a service. So thank you. Thank you for that golden nugget. Financial management. This was your final piece of your debt payoff journey. You adopted a zero-based budgeting approach, the snowball debt payoff method. If you're not familiar with either of those things, they're very well known in the personal finance space. Just do a quick Google and you'll be able to get kind of a sense of what those two things look like. But what I wanted to ask you, Taylor, is when you did the zero-based budget, what did you find were the 3 categories or spending areas in your personal lives that you were able to actually cut back on and save the most amount of money on?
So a part of it was like phantom costs, things I didn't even know I was spending money on, right? That was probably the number one. I didn't account for like subscriptions that renew once a year, that if it's not happening month to month, I forget about until it happens. And I'm like, crap, and then that happens, right? So the like phantom costs, and also the phantom cost of not planning ahead. And like, I know I sound like everybody's mom, but like, if you can look ahead at your year and think about like, oh yeah, my license renews every year and I have to, replace my plates on my car, or I know I have to go to the dentist, or I know these things are coming up. So again, this is like the 4-year down to 1 year. If I know these costs are coming and I'm not prepared for them, I put them on a credit card, and then I'm paying interest on something that I easily could have paid for had I thought more than 1 month in advance. So the phantom costs are the things that we don't realize we're paying for. And then it's also the lack of planning. So I incorporate that into the phantom cost part. So that's one. The second one would be giving. I did not realize how much money I was spending on other people. And it was an area I had to cut back temporarily, because I can't give to other people if I'm drilling a hole in my own boat and sinking at the same time, right? And now that we're debt-free, I can give to other people and I don't even have to think about it. I get to give to the charities I like to give to, which is also a tax write-off. And like all of these things I get to do now, like clear conscience. And I'm not sitting there wondering, going, did I have money to pay for everybody's drinks? Or like, is that okay that I treated my girlfriend to dinner? Or like, is it all right if I pay for this for my family? Like, I don't even have to think about it. But that was one that I didn't realize, and my husband too, he was the type to like buy Starbucks for everybody. And I was like, no more Starbucks. for anybody until we pay that last payment.
So, like, such wonderful people with such generous hearts. How lucky that the two of you found each other and you both have such a generous spirit. So, anyways, I just had to say that. Continue.
And now we get to do that for fun. And we like sponsor other people to pay for things. Like we sponsored a scholarship with a dance company that we used to dance with. And like these are things that now we get to do in these larger scale giving, which feels so good. And we don't even have to think about it. And then the third place, which I'm also going to be like a Debbie Downer here, is food. We cut back so much on food. It was unreal the amount of money we were spending on food. And this is like embarrassing to admit, but food we would throw out. So this would be like the food cycle. I would go to the grocery store and I'd buy all this food. It would look great. And then I would eat like half of it, my husband and I. And then the rest would kind of sit in the fridge and sit in the fridge. And then it would like go in the other part of the fridge until it was rotten enough for me to like compost it or throw it away. And then it got to a point where I saw somebody as like, I can't remember where this was because I also went off social media at that time too, which I think also saved me money. So like pro tip, don't go on social media. And I've been social media free and my businesses too since 2019. But I think that was a huge part. I saw somebody share like something where they had put dollar bills from like the grocery bag into the fridge and then they moved it around the fridge. Like they literally did my thing, but with dollar bills, and then they just like threw it in the garbage. And I was like, and it just like crushed me. I felt so seen in the worst way. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. So planning in that way really helped because we did meal planning too. And we saw when things were going bad and I was like, we will use this. And so we had like a whole system with our food that we kind of revamped. And it reminded me of like what my mom used to do when we were younger because I didn't grow up wealthy or like with means. And we would plan through like eat through the fresh and then eat through the dry and then eat through the frozen. And then like, it'd just be this cycle. And when things were going bad, it would turn into frozen. And it was just much more strategic with that. And there was way less waste. And also we didn't go out to eat as much. So food was another big thing. And that's something now that I've got 2 kids and like they're young, but they're machines. Let me tell you, Ellen, they eat enough for a lot of people. And and so it's really fun to like have our grocery bill be lower than what kind of the average is. And, and now that we're debt free, we get to spend a little bit more on that, which is fun. But, I think food, phantom costs, which is kind of that lack of planning. And then, the other one is escaping me now. What was that?
It was giving.
That one. I think I forget because we still do so much of it. And I'm like, we never really gave that up. But yes, giving. We pared back on that temporarily so that we could bail ourselves out.
I think that's such an important note too, right? It's that not everything has to be forever. The temporary aspect of being able to make sacrifices or change your behaviors in certain ways allows you to get to a point where you can give back even more, like you said. So I really appreciate your honesty there. I think to wrap up this case study, Taylor, what I would love to do is if you have the numbers top of mind, like you mentioned, you had originally planned to pay off this $65,000 to $70,000 in about 26 months. You were actually able to do it in 9 months. What did that payoff cadence actually look like over those 9 months? Was it an even amount over all 9 months? Did you see spikes? And if you remember what those spikes and averages were, if you could share, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started with like a soft start. So this is like when we were a soft launch with our debt-free journey. We did because it was like, wow, we've never paid this much towards our debt before. This is kind of scary. I don't know how I feel about spending, 2x what we normally do on our debt payment. So we did a soft start and that we paid, I have the numbers here, $2,982.09. Yes, down to the penny we would pay. And that was what we were comfortable with that first month. And then after that paid off like one credit card right away. So we saw like the instant, oh my God, that one's done. Okay, cool. And it paid a little bit more to the next one. So then we got much more bold with the second month. And our goal was to hit around $4,000 a month. If we did that, we would be on track for this like 26-ish months, including like interest and things. But because we started going faster and faster, we just saw that number decrease because you're not having to account for as much interest. So the next month we went full force. We like drained some of our savings a little bit because we had over indexed there. And it was like, let's throw this at the debt too. So the second month we paid $9,111.99. So we 5x'd it almost. Is that right? 4x'd it ish. And then after that, we had gone on vacation that month and we had that planned ahead of time. So a lot of those payments were done, but the actual travel and the fact that we took time away from work resulted in a lower payment the following month. So then we dipped below that 4,000 goal and we were around $3,007. And then we hopped back on track for December. And then it stayed pretty consistent around 4,400, 500, or 5,500, 5,000, 4,000. And then we had a whole bunch of stuff happen all at once. We had like a roof leak, and then my husband's phone broke, and then like all this stuff happened. And then at the same time, we had this hidden gem of like an old insurance policy that my mom had taken out on me when I was like 5 months old. I don't know. This happened in like the 80s. I'm not trying to date myself, but like that was the thing. And I was like, I pay for my own life insurance now. Like, we don't need this other life insurance. Like, is it okay, Mom? Can I cash this in? And she was like, sure, sounds great. And so we did that. And then even with like, I think it was a total like a $3,000 hit in 1 month that we had to pay for with like the roof leak and everything else, we still managed about a $4,000 payment. And then the following month, it was up another $8,800. And then at this point, we were so close. We're in like within like $10,000 of this debt. And this was, now like 7-ish months. So in the following month, we did 6,700. We like squished as much as we could. We hustled as much as we could. And it was like, we're so close. And then we were hoping by the end of July, we'd be able to pay it off. And then like halfway through, it was like, well, we have all the money. Let's just dump it there and pay it. And like, let's crush it. And it was the student loan, which was like one of our biggest loans that we had. And so that one was around $4,500. $4,525.54. Like, we literally threw every single penny, every single month. It was like down to the penny. And then in total, initially when we started, our debt was around $65,000. And then by the end of it, we paid off $69,341.32 because interest is a sneaky little sucker. Let me tell you, in that 9 months, paying like $5,000 more in interest just killed me. But it is what it is.
But to think how much more interest you would have paid over the 26 months or even over the years had you never looked in those dark corners and really had to have this like face-to-face moment of, okay, are we doing this or are we just going to keep ignoring this? And wow, that is incredible. I just want to celebrate you for a moment. I mean, no small feat to do 69,000 and change in 9 months. I mean, truly so incredible. On top of still, paying for all of your other living expenses and running a business and raising children and all these things. So huge congratulations. And I mean, you clearly are a listener of our podcast because you came prepared with with the numbers down to the penny.
Yeah.
I love it when people do that. So thank you for taking the extra time to research and prepare ahead of this interview. Taylor, I am just, like I said, so in awe of all you've done and really the mindset and the approach that you have towards success and what it really means to build a rich life. So thank you for sharing your perspective and your story with us today. Where can our listeners continue to connect with you and be part of the work that you're doing in the world?
Absolutely. So like I said, I am not on social media. I pop on there to announce that I'm pregnant or having a baby, and that's about it.
I love that.
I'm not on it at all. I don't have the apps, and I've been off since 2019. So the best way to stay in touch with me is actually email. I invest all of my time into emailing and chatting with people, and I take that very seriously. So you can head to my website. It's my full name, tayloraller.com. You can reach out through the contact form. It'll go right to my inbox, and I do read and reply to almost every single one. Takes me a bit of time, but I get there. And I get to share lovely updates. That's where you do get to see my kids because I don't share them anywhere else. And you do get to kind of see what's new. And I'm so excited because I'm just coming out of my second mat leave with my son. And in a couple months, I get to like dive full force back into work. And I have just been like a race car idling, if you know that feeling. I love my children, but I'm like so excited to get back into work full time. So yeah, I'm super excited to dive back into consulting. I've had a few clients here and there through mat leave and to dive back into my practice. And yeah, I love working with other multi-passionate people. So if you're a multi-potentialite too, come hang out and say hi because I'd love to be your friend. You're my people.
I have a feeling there's going to be many first-time identified multi-potentialites in our audience who are sending you an email. In fact, if this interview was your first time hearing that term, as it was for me, because I have tended to use the word multi-passionate in the past. So if multi-potentialite was a new word for you, but you identify strongly with it in what Taylor shared today, will you please send Taylor an email? Go to the website and contact form, make your subject line multi-potentialite, and then share about what you are multi-passionate about what you're doing in your business. So anyways, all make sure to link Taylor's website and the contact form below in the show notes. So please, please take her up on that offer. Taylor sends wonderful emails. I can personally attest to it. And Taylor, thank you again for sharing your case study with us today.
Thank you, Ellen. It's so fun to get to be with you. And thank you for being so transparent. You're changing the world, and I don't think you know it.
Thank you. That means a lot.